Hey guys, I am Nitij. In this tutorial, we are going to create a secure React application that uses Auth0 for authentication and Redux Toolkit for managing our application's auth state. An auth provider, in this case Auth0, acts as a system for managing user authentication and authorization. It handles everything from user registration, login, password resets, to securing your APIs. It is a service that authenticates users on your behalf, so you don't have to deal with passwords or security issues directly. This allows us to focus on building our app's features instead. So for this tutorial, we will be using React for our frontend, Auth0 as our authentication provider, and Redux Toolkit for state management in our application. So let's first see how we can get started with Auth0. So Auth0 is a service which is provided by Okta, which is itself a very popular brand which provides authentication and authorization services. To use Auth0, first you will have to sign up if you don't already have an account, and you can either use your email and password to do that, or you can also continue with existing Google, GitHub or Microsoft accounts. You will be able to use the basic services by using the free account, and when your account will be created, then a default application is going to be created for you, which is this one, default app. This my app is created by me, which I created for testing the tutorial project, but don't worry, I will show you how to create a new application as well. Now before we go into how to create a new application in Auth0 dashboard, first let's see the demo of the project, what we are going to build. So this is the homepage with a message which says welcome to React Auth0 Redux integration, and in the top navbar there is a button or a link which says register and login. Now with Auth0 we can use the same dialog to login and register. So for example, I have already created an account, so I will simply enter my password and I will click on continue. When I will do that, then we can redirect to another page. In our case, it is the dashboard. Now dashboard is a protected route, so it is only accessible when any user is logged in, and then the dashboard can be used to display user specific features and information. You can see over here that my email ID is being displayed because I have logged in, and similar to logging in, you can log out by clicking on this button. All the APIs to log in and log out are pre-provided by Auth0, so we don't have to build anything from scratch. Alright, now let's get started with our code walkthrough. This is Visual Studio Code, and I have already created a React boilerplate application by using the create react app npx command. First, I will quickly install Tailwind CSS because that is what we will be using to style our HTML and JSX. We also need to install a bunch of other dependencies as well. So these are going to be the Auth0 React dependency, the Redux Toolkit, the React Redux, and the React Router DOM for setting up our basic routing. Now I will start with setting up our Redux store. For that, I will create a new folder in the src folder with the name features, and within features I will create another folder with the name auth. First, let's set up our auth slice. So let's create a new file with the name auth slice.js. In this file, I will first import create slice. So create slice from Redux Toolkit. Next, let's create our auth slice. So export const auth slice equals to create slice, and then we have to provide the options for the name. The name is going to be auth, and let's provide the value for the initial state as well, which is going to be an object, and we are going to add the properties if the user is authenticated or not. So is authenticated with a default value of false, if the authentication state is loading or not, which will be initially set to true, and then the user object, which is going to be set with the value of null as a default value. Next, we are going to set the reducers, which we will use to update our state. So set auth state, and this is going to be a function which is accepting the arguments state and action. So we are going to read the values from the actions payload. So state dot is authenticated equals to action dot payload dot is authenticated. Now I'm going to copy it 2 more times and set the value for loading and user as well. Now finally we need to export our set auth state from the auth slice actions and also the auth slice reducer. So export const set auth state from auth slice dot actions and export. The default export is going to be the auth slice dot reducer. So this is what we need to do to create our auth slice. Now let's set up our Redux store. For that I will create a new folder in the src folder with the name app, and inside app I will create a new file with the name store.js. Now this folder and file structure is specific to your own project standards or your personal preferences, so feel free to change it as per your likings. So for Redux store, first I will import configure store from Redux Toolkit, and then let's import our auth reducer from the auth slice file. So features and then auth and then auth slice. Now let's create our store and export it. So export const store equals to configure store, and then over here we need to provide the value for the reducer property. So reducer is going to be an object, and let's add the property for the auth reducer. So auth is going to be the auth reducer. So this is everything we need to do to set up our Redux store. Now let's start to set up our basic routing for our homepage, for the dashboard, and also for the navbar. So let me just zoom out a little bit and then let's open up the app.js. So from the app component we are going to render our routes, but before that let's create the root components. First I will create a new folder in the src folder with the name components. So components, and let's first create the folder for our navbar, and we will need another folder for our homepage and another one for the dashboard, and we are going to build these one by one. So in the navbar I will create a new file with the name index.jsx. So let's use the shortcut to add the boilerplate component. So navbar, and in the navbar we are just going to display either the login register button or the logout button, and they will be displayed based on the fact that if the user is authenticated or not, and the parent element that we will be returning is going to be the nav element. Now I'm just going to set a bunch of Tailwind's utility classes to style our navbar. So this is going to be a fixed navbar in the top with the height of 12 points with some other styling information, and within this nav element we will utilize the authentication state of the user to render the HTML. Now let's import use selector from React Redux, and we can destructure the is authenticated and is loading property values. So const is authenticated and is loading from our Redux auth slice. So use selector and then state dot auth. Now first we will check if the auth state is loading or not. If it is loading, then we will display an empty fragment. Otherwise we will check if user is authenticated or not. If the user is authenticated, then we will display the logout button. Otherwise we will display the login button. Now for the logout button I am going to add the button element, and I am going to style it with Tailwind's utility classes. So class name, this is going to have these classes as the values. Now let's add the on click event placeholder, but let's come back to it later when we have set up our Auth0 application. So for now I'm just leaving this on click event handler as an empty function, the logout button's text is going to say log out. Now similarly we can add the login button as well. So I'm just going to copy this button and paste it over here with the text register and log in. After our navbar is created, let's create the home page and the dashboard. So for home page I will create a new file and let's just call it as index.jsx. Use the shortcut to create the component boilerplate and let's just call it as home. Now I'm going to remove this home from over here and let's add Tailwind's utility classes to style our home component. Now within this div I'm going to add another div to print the message welcome to React Auth0 Redux integration demo, and let's just save it. And for the dashboard let's create another file which is going to be called as index.jsx, and again use the shortcut to set up the boilerplate component, and this is going to be called as dashboard. Now for the dashboard, for now I'm just going to add the Tailwind's classes and we will visit it later to print the user's email and the helpful message after we have set up our Auth0 account. So let's save it for now, and now let's open up app.js file to set up our basic routing. So the first thing that I will do is to remove the stuff that we are not going to need. So let's remove everything from over here, and now first I will create another component which is going to act as the app component's child, which is actually going to render our routes. So function app content, so app content is going to be this component's name. Now we are going to use the use routes for setting up our basic routing. So import use routes from React router DOM, and we will also need to import the Redux provider and the Redux store dependencies. So import and provider from React Redux, and similarly let's also import our store from our apps store. Let's also import the components that we are going to need for our basic routing. So import dashboard and import home and import navbar. First in the app content I will create an array for our routes. So const root array equals to a new array, and the first item is going to be the root element for our home page. So the path is going to be a wildcard character which is going to match with every path which is not matching with any specific path, and the element for this is going to be our home component. Now let's copy and paste this one for the dashboard. So I'm going to write the dashboard's path over here and the element is going to be dashboard. Now we will create a const root element equals to use routes hook, and we will provide our root array as an argument. So root array, and now from over here we are going to return a div. So return div, and then inside this div first let's just style it with Tailwind's classes. So this is just going to be styled as a flex container, and first we are going to render the navbar for our entire single page application, and then we will render a div which is going to have our root element. Let's style this parent div for every root element as well as a flex container, and it is going to have pt or padding top as 12 because this is what the height of our navbar is. So we just need to leave some gap for our navbar to display and then start rendering the content for the individual root elements. So for now this is all we need to do to create our app content component. Now within app, the first thing that we need to do is to add the provider. So provider, and the provider's store prop is going to be the store, the Redux store that we created, and then we are simply going to render app content as a child of our provider. Now our basic routing is completed, our Redux store is set up. All that is needed to do now is to create our Auth0 application. So let's get started with that. To create a new Auth0 application, you just need to click on this applications on the left nav and click on the create application button. You will have to enter your application name. So for example, I can enter my React app, and then you will have to select the application type. In our case, it is going to be a single page web application, and click on create. Now, depending on the framework that you are using, you can click on the framework icon and you will be presented with the documentation about how to set up and configure your Auth0 and then integrate it with your application. So basically what you have to do is you have to add a bunch of URLs in your application's settings, such as the callback URL, the logout URL, and then you will have to install the Auth0 SDK dependency, which we have already done for our project. And then you will have to use this Auth0 provider parent component, which is going to encapsulate or enclose your entire app component. This is going to have the auth state available to your entire application by using the Auth0's hook. So you can simply import use Auth0 in any of the component as long as those components are a child of this Auth0 provider. Now you must be thinking, why then do we need to use the Redux state if we can already use the use Auth0 hook to check for the authentication states? Well, the reason is most of the medium to large applications use a dedicated state management solution, and integrating our authentication states with that centralized state management is going to help us to do a lot of things when it comes to adding pages and features for the application. Alright, so let's now see the settings tab and check out what values for the URLs we need to add. Now, because I have already created an application for this tutorial, I will simply show you the values directly. So let's open up the settings tab for this my app, which I'm currently using. So these two values, domain and client ID, will need to be used for our auth provider component, and you will need to enter the callback URL. So this callback URL is the one where user is going to be redirected after they have logged in. Logout URL is the one when the user will be logged out, then they will be redirected to this URL. Now you can enter multiple URLs over here based on the number of environments your application have, such as dev, QA, UAT, production, etc. And it's up to you to configure the URL that you need to use in your environment variables, and the URL that you set in your environment variables need to exactly match with the ones that you have provided over here for security purposes. And you will have to provide your allowed web origin. I have also provided the allowed origin for CORS. So let's get back to our application. Now in this app component, first let's use the Auth0 provider component and add it as a parent to our Redux store. So let's do that, but first we will have to import it. So I'm just going to import it. So import Auth0 provider. Now let's add it, Auth0 provider, and let's just move it as a child for this component. Now for the values for domain, client ID, and the redirect URI, I'm going to create a .env file, or the file to store our environment variables. So .env, and within this .env we need to add the values for our Auth0 domain and the client ID and our redirect URI, and let's also add the logout URL over here, or the return to URL. Now the values for these ones are going to be the one which are here in the settings. So I'm just going to copy the domain from over here and let's paste it. The client ID is this one. Let's copy it and then paste it over here. For redirect URI, we need to redirect to the dashboard root, and for return to, we just need to redirect to the home page, which is going to be localhost 3000, where our React application is going to be hosted. Now it is a good practice to add a .env .example file as well for the new developers. When they will set up this repository for the first time, then they will know what environment variables need to be added to the .env file. So I'm just going to copy everything from over here and then paste it. Just remove any sensitive information like the client ID or the domain values, and I think redirect URI and return to values can be kept as is. And now let's close these two files, save it. Now let's fetch the client ID and the domain from our environment variables, and let's use them in our auth provider. So domain, client ID, and for the redirect URI we need to use this authorization params prop with this specific object structure. Let's format this document. Okay, next we need to know when the auth0's authentication state is changing, and based on that we need to update our Redux store values as well for our auth slice. So for that I will create a new folder in the components folder with the name auth, and inside auth I will create a new folder for a hook that we will use for this purpose. So new folder and then use auth listener. Now inside this folder I will create a new file with the name index.js. Now inside use auth listener I will first create a function for our hook, which is going to be called as use auth listener, and this is going to be an arrow function. Let's just export it as well as a default export. So export default and then use auth listener. Now first we need to fetch the auth values from auth0, and that can be done by first importing the use auth0 hook from auth0 react, and then I will simply destructure the values that we need to use. So const is authenticated and then the user and then is loading equals to use auth0. Now we need to import use dispatch, and we will also need to import our set auth state from our auth slice. So import set auth state, and then let's also import the effect hook, because that is what we will be using to listen to the changes to these auth properties. So use effect from react. Now let's create the const for our dispatch. So dispatch equals to use dispatch and use effect the callback function, and let's first add the dependency array. So dependency array is going to be for the dispatch when it is available, and the is authenticated, user, and is loading values. Now for the callback functions code, we will simply call dispatch and we will call set auth state by providing these three values in the actions payload. So is authenticated and user and then is loading, and this is all we need to do to set up our use auth listener hook. And now let's get back to our app.js file where we are going to use it. So inside the app content component I will import this hook. So const auth equals to use auth listener. So this will initialize auth listener hook and it will start listening to the auth0 state changes, but then we can also use it to render our dashboard as well. Now the dashboard is going to be a protected root, so for that let's create a wrapper first. I will do that by first creating a new folder for our protected root. So protected protected root, and then let's create a new file within it with the name index.jsx. Now let's use this shortcut to add the boilerplate component. So the name is going to be protected root, and then let's first import the navigate component from React Router DOM. So we will use it to navigate to the home page if the user is not authenticated. Now let's add a couple of props over here. The first one is going to be the children prop, and then the second one is going to be the auth values. So let's destructure the auth values. So const is authenticated, and then let's also use is loading as well. So equals to auth, if the auth state is loading, then we will simply display a loading state. So for that we can just return a normal div which can have its text as loading, and if is authenticated, then we can simply return the children. If none of these conditions are true, then we can simply return the navigate component with the toProps value pointing towards the the home page. Okay, let's remove this default return statement and let's format this document as well. Now let's get back to our app.js file, and I am just going to import the protected root, and let's use the protected root for our dashboard root. So protected root, and the this is going to be a parent element for the dashboard, and then we can provide the auth props value with the auth listeners return value. Now there is one thing that I have missed over here, and that is to return the auth properties from our use auth listener. So let's do that, because if we will not be returning anything, then we will not be able to know what is the auth state. Now we can use auth0 hook as well for that purpose, but because of our decoupling goals, let's use this hook to return these values. So return is loading and is authenticated. Now we have done almost everything. The only thing which I think is left is to add the on-click events for our navbar's login and logout buttons. So first let's do that for login, and of course we need to update our dashboard as well. Okay, but first let's deal with the login and logout. So I'm going to import the use auth0 hook from auth0 react, and let's destructure the function to login. So login with redirect equals to use auth0. Now we will use this login with redirect function for our login functions click event, and similarly for logout we are going to destructure the log out function, and then we are going to call this function. But with logout we need to do something else as well, and that is to provide an argument for our logout params return to value. So let's add an options object with the property logout params. This is going to be another object where we have to provide the return to props value, which is going to be our return to URL. So we have already added this URL's value to our environment variables. So process.env dot, and then let's open up our .env file, and I'm going to copy this variable's name and use it over here. Now let's just format this document. Now let's open up our dashboard as well, and for dashboard I'm going to update the text that we are printing. So for that, first let's import use selector from React Redux, and then const user equals to use selector. So state.auth, and I'm going to remove this dashboard text, and then if user is not null, then we can simply return a span with the text hello user.email, you are now logged in. This is, I think, pretty much everything we need to do for our application to work. To test it, I'm just going to open up the terminal and enter the command npm and then start. Okay, so we have an error over here which says use routes may be used only in the context of a router component. So I have missed doing one thing, which is in the index.js file we need to use the browser router. So I'm going to import it over here. So import browser router from React router DOM, and then we need to enclose our app with the browser router component, and let's remove the stuff that we don't need. Now let's check if it's working now. Now there is one more error which says set auth state is not a function. When I checked our auth slice, then I found that I missed to add the reducers property. So this set auth state needs to be a property within the reducers object, because this is going to be our reducer. So I'm just going to move it over here. So now our page is loading, and let's click on this register login button. Now I have to enter the password because the user is already created, and let's click on continue. We have successfully been redirected to the dashboard root, and my email ID is being displayed over here, which simply means that our Auth0 integration is working correctly. Now let's click on the logout button as well, and when I have done that, then we have been redirected to the home page. Now let's try to access our protected root, which is dashboard. So we are not able to do that, and we are being redirected again to the home page. And that was everything we planned to build today. We have successfully created a secure React application utilizing Auth0 as our auth provider and Redux Toolkit for state management. You have seen how these technologies simplify authentication and state management in any web application. If you found this tutorial helpful, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this. Your support encourages me to keep creating helpful tutorials. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.